I'm Greg. This is Sam.
Sam.
We're the opening act, which means we're here to make everyone else look better when we're done.
We're good at that. So, a couple of years ago, on a fall day, Greg and I took our students down to the offices of Daniel Libeskind, the architect. So we were teaching a class at Syracuse University Architecture School called Never Built, New York. And as the name suggests, Never Built, it was all about plans for the city over about 200 years that hadn't happened. That would be urban plans, architectural plans, anything that was conceived that got dashed. And Daniel, when we took the kids in, showed us a bunch of his own Never Builts. He showed us a whole slew of projects that he'd worked on for years. And at the end of the day, they didn't happen. And so I asked him, I said, how do you deal with all this failure in your career? Like these things that you've been putting your soul into and then they just die. And he said, that's not how you have to look at it. You have to love these ideas that you've created, like these concepts and these visions so much that it doesn't matter if they get built.
So for us on that visit, we felt Daniel had really summarized the essence of architecture. It's the love of the idea that matters. The concept, the passion of the concept is buried in the concept. The spirit of a building, that flows from the architect's hand onto the paper.
Or computer, mouse.
It might. What follows could be a disaster, or it could be a great success. But as Daniel was always wont to remind us, the ideal, all too frequently, gets into a headlong collision with reality.
He is chipper, Daniel.
Upbeat.
It's good. So that's where we come in. We're, for better or worse, experts in failure, as you can probably tell. Just kidding. So over the last 10 years, we've been working on books, we've been working on exhibitions, and we've been working on oops, I went the wrong way. We've been working on teaching classes like the one at Syracuse. And along the way, we've discovered a few things. One of them is that, yeah, failure stinks. It's ugly. There's folly, there's pain, but there's also a really beautiful part of it. It's kind of a crazy beauty, I like to call it. It's that power of dreams and of those passions that Daniel was talking about, so that you head straight forward, right into failure, even if it's against your better judgments, even if it's against what reality is telling you, and you go right for failure, you embrace it, because that's what you have to do to achieve that.
Perfect example here. Daniel Libeskind, who you may know, had probably one of the biggest failures in the history of recent architectural plans. He had won the master plan competition for the World Trade Center, where the Twin Towers once stood, and he presented his signature idea, the Freedom Tower, this crystalline skyscraper that would have become the tallest building in the world, with spiraling gardens climbing up toward that spire. It was a symbol of light after an hour of darkness. But Daniel wasn't all that lucky. The developer of this property didn't want Daniel, didn't want his drawings. Instead, what he wanted was another architect.
He never wanted Daniel.
Never. And what did he get? He got a torqued glass what would you call it, Sam?
Bunker.
Bunker at the foot of Manhattan, looming like a gigantic tombstone.
And Daniel's portfolio of failure, as we like to call it, I don't think he likes to call it that.
I don't think he's got a file folder that says that.
It's almost as long as his actual portfolio, and that's not that uncommon. That's sort of part of being an architect. And we've been working on these exhibits and these books, and we keep coming across his failures. So here's an example. This is the One Madison Tower that he was planning, also in New York, and also a tower of spiraling greenery. And this one got killed by the Great Recession around 2007. And we're working in Paris now. We saw another project. This is a project called the Tour Signal, another spiraling helix of greenery, this time a lot more jagged. It's a beautiful tower in La Défense. It got killed because it lost a competition. But then the winner of the competition, Jean Nouvel, he didn't win either because nobody won.
For Daniel, one project after another, of spiraling green skyscrapers never went up. Sometimes it was because the economy had tanked. Other times, developers were just too greedy. Sometimes it was politicians who were completely single-minded, couldn't care less.
No vision.
No vision, absolutely no vision. But Daniel gave up on the buildings. He never, ever gave up on the idea. And for us, that's the very first lesson of never build. A building could succumb to reality, but an inspiration does not.
No, that's true, and that inspiration that we're talking about gets embedded. That vision that Daniel holds on to so tightly, it's really embedded, and so are his ideas, in these images that Greg was talking about, and in models and in sketches. It's embedded right in there, and what it does is it makes us question. That's really important. It makes us think about, why didn't that happen? And why can't we build a better building? And why can't we build better cities?
Here might be the best example I can think of, certainly one of our favorite images. This would have been Los Angeles International Airport,
LAX.
circa 1955. It's a watercolor drawing of the soaring jet age delivered to Los Angeles, the city of the future. You could just imagine yourself entering this glorious space, traversing this enormous concourse, looking up through that glass dome as airplanes climbed into the clouds and disappeared into the heavens. It really is an image that says, here is a modern cathedral. What happened?
Well, so first of all, I like to think about how this could have affected buildings in LA moving forward. And because you think this kind of inspiration, how could that inspire other architects in Los Angeles? And how could that inspire architects all over the world? You start going crazy thinking about what could have been. But this time, reality came in. And the engineers, sorry to all you engineers out there. No, there's a lot at Purdue. The engineers wound up killing the project. They didn't think, A, that it could even be built at all. B, if it could be built, they didn't think it could be air-conditioned. Makes some sense, I guess. But
Now more than ever.
And third, to make things worse, the airlines, they didn't want to play together. They didn't want to share the same terminal. And if anybody here has been to LAX, they got their wish. They each got their own terminal.
So what you have is spineless imagination, which gives you unimaginative architecture. Here it is, LAX today, hardly the romance of jet age travel, hardly the city of the future, more like Frank Gehry's acerbic remark, most architecture is shit.
His words, not ours. So let's go across the country to New York, and let's not look at a beautiful drawing, let's look at a model. And this is a plan back in 1930 by a firm called Howie and Lescaz. They were very visionary, and they had a plan for the Museum of Modern Art. And this plan was essentially they called it a skyscraper museum. What they did was you see these cubes that are sort of cantilevered off the side? They were called light mixing chambers. And they were essentially vessels so that light from all sides could get in, natural light could get in from all sides. And then you had different types of surfaces on there, different types of glass, scrims. That would all be created to create the perfect environment for this radical art that was going to be inside. So then what you have there essentially is a radical building that's informed by radical art. It's a really inspirational idea. But instead, what you got was Edward Durrell Stone and Philip Goodwin's plan. This was after several years later, which, yes, it's a very modern design and it's iconic. But what it isn't is it's not informed by the art inside. It's not a really radical design. It's really informed, if you look at it, by the needs of the city and by the needs of MoMA itself. So it's really a building that's informed by the institution and not informed really by the art.
So that leads us to ask a pretty simple question. Could a radical building inspire radical architecture? And we think the answer is yes. You got to move forward 60 years and arrive in Bilbao, Spain.
That's the one in the middle.
Yes, the one at the bottom here. That's Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Bilbao, which created the Bilbao effect. Museums all over the world took the cue and ran with it.
And so we lost, perhaps modernism would have gone in a different direction. You don't know. But as Kurt Vonnegut, Indianapolis native Kurt Vonnegut said, and so it goes. So many, sometimes brilliant, sometimes not, dreams dashed by our kind of enemy, reality.
Here you have Daniel Burnham's plan for Chicago, which would have transformed the city into wide diagonal boulevards, all converging on a centerpiece, a huge monument.
And in New York City again, a rendering by a great graphic renderer, Hugh Ferris, a plan by Raymond Hood, one of the geniuses of density in New York. He designed Rockefeller Center. And this is called the Skyscraper Bridge. And as the name suggests, you have a skyscraper merged with a bridge. Kind of an interesting idea.
And here, a simple, prosaic map, except that the red lines all represent subways for Los Angeles, which today is only now beginning to build subways. This is 1925.
So if you think about this one, this wouldn't have just impacted how people get around in Los Angeles, which I think you can imagine is not this way.
You saw what LAX looks like.
But it also would have affected how LA developed at large. So you just think about the ramification of that and your head starts to explode. But anyway, these are innovative ideas that were dashed. But the truth is the ideal isn't always ideal. And sometimes these really innovative ideas by geniuses that are, genius ideas, they're not so good. Sometimes we dodge a bullet. Sometimes these beautifully rendered ideas would have been disasters.
Corbusier's plan, Voisin.
Corbusier, one of the established masters of modernism.
Absolutely. This is Paris, France, in case you didn't recognize it, except that it's been leveled, flattened into 10-lane wide boulevards and avenues, and dominoes of cold concrete rising up.
Yeah, not so genius if you look at it now.
No.
And then,
it was considered ingenious.
Another genius of the time, speaking of concrete, was Marcel Breuer. And he had just come off the victory of designing the Whitney Museum in New York, a museum I really like, actually. But this plan I don't like as much. This is a plan basically to ram a concrete and glass skyscraper straight through the heart of Grand Central Terminal.
No more Grand Concourse, all gone.
Basically giving it a lobotomy. And this idea was seen as progressive. This is how times change. This was considered by the head of the Whitney, the head of the Guggenheim, and the editor-in-chief of Architectural Record were all in support. They saw this as progressive.
And talking about progressive, here's the Santa Monica Freeway in Los Angeles, progressing right across the shoreline, out into Santa Monica Bay, eliminating the bay by turning into an island for a 4-lane highway so you could race up the coastline at 75 miles an hour. Pretty darn believable because the state legislature had this green-lighted for more than 20 years.
It was on the books.
Ready to go.
But good or bad, in my opinion, these ideas, they don't ever really die. It's not like they just keel over.
For us, we like to call them ghosts. What they become, for some architects, is an inspiration, sometimes for the architect who originally invented the idea.
Yeah, sometimes it's the architect, and sometimes it inspires somebody completely different. And here's an example. This is a plan by New York architect Stephen Hull, and it's called the Bridge of Houses. And as its name suggests, it's a bridge, a residential bridge above an elevated railway line that was slated for demolition. This is in the 1980s. That plan didn't happen, but about 20 years, even more than 20 years later, different architects picked up that idea. They were inspired by this, and they created the High Line, which, as you may know, is one of the most successful urban parks in the world.
Or take this one. This black tower was going to be ABC TV's headquarters in New York City, designed by William Pereira.
This model was in our show in New York.
And it went kaput. Heave-ho by ABC. We're not going to build it. Pereira didn't give up. A few years later, here it is. It appears in reality in San Francisco as the Transamerica Tower, one of the iconic skyscrapers in the world.
It's white, not black. Yeah.
It is white.
Yeah, big difference. So, but even our good friend Daniel Libeskind, remember him? we joke about his failure, but even he was able to create this spiraling tower that he kept trying over and over to do. And now it's being built in the town of Toulouse, France, and it's called the Tour Occitanie.
So you see, an idea actually really never dies. And that's why Sam and I have spent, I can't add up the number of hours, in the basements of archives and libraries looking for these lost and long forgotten visions. And we're as obsessed as the people who made those visions in the first place. Because for us, we want to put them back out into the world in the hope that they will inspire new visions. These are just a few of the ones that we've come across.
Just a few.
Thousands.
If we could start going through those, but it'll take about a week. Yeah, that passion that we keep digging up, we find that it's really contagious. And we get our own dreams sometimes. And this is an example. We wanted to resurrect the vision of a famous industrial designer from the mid-century named Elliot Noyes. He had designed this, which was the Westinghouse Pavilion, which is one of the centerpieces. It was supposed to be one of the centerpieces of the 1964 New York World's Fair. Obviously never built. But we had the idea of resurrecting it, and we didn't want it to be a model like this, and we didn't want it to be on the walls like a painting or a rendering. We wanted it to be something that people could really interact with, and we wanted kids and adults, everybody to be able to enjoy it. So our crazy vision brought the bouncy castle, and yes, we did build a bouncy castle. Thanks to Greg in a large part. It's a long story. And it was almost never built.
It was, and almost never built.
Several times. But our crazy vision created something that people did interact with. And some of the people that interacted with it are these kids, who happen to be my nephews. Let's give them a second to enjoy it for a second.
Yeah, we're supposed to bounce everyone. Go like this.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is this fun?
That's good. They're
That's
better.
real architecture.
They're better. That's Isaac. And that's Ben on the left. And they compliment me, but we don't have to hear that. Anyway, I'm very proud. But I'm more than proud. When I saw them bouncing around inside that bouncy castle, something for me kind of clicked. And it was the idea that, we had resurrected Elliot Noyes' vision and taking it out of obscurity. But we didn't copy it. We created it. We made it into our own dream. And that's sort of how inspiration works. It's not a carbon copy. You bring your own dreams to it. And that process is continuing to this day. The bouncy castle went from our exhibition to the home of our designer of our show, genius Christian Wassman. And that guy, Stephen Hole, who designed the Bridge of Houses, he actually bounced around in it. Long story. And then finally, it ended up at Burning Man. Really. That's not a rendering. That's real. And we don't even really know what happened there inside of the bouncy castle.
We have no idea what went on inside that bouncy castle. The bouncy castle, we don't even know where it is right now. Maybe it's folded up somewhere on Christian's homestead there. But when our exhibition was up, we brought Elliot Noyes' son, Frederick, to walk through the show.
He didn't bounce in the castle.
He didn't bounce in the castle.
No.
Adults weren't allowed in at a certain point. So he walked through and he looked at more than 100 never-built ideas. And he turned to us and he said, I don't find this the least bit depressing. These aren't failures at all. What they are ideas that push beyond the limits of reality. They demand the impossible. And for us, we believe that's what invigorates us all.
That's the power. And to sum it up, I'm going to have one of the world's greatest dreamers speak for us. That's Cervantes' Don Quixote, who I like to call a latter-day architect. You don't like that at all.
No.
But anyway. He said, "When life itself seems lunatic, who knows where madness lies?
Perhaps to be too practical is madness.
To surrender dreams, this
may be madness." Thank you very much.